Hi, welcome to episode 3 of Stucky's Travels. When we posted on Facebook that we were taking requests on where we should talk about, continental US came up quite a bit. So we decided to choose a place where a lot of people go, but maybe some spots that aren't quite as common of destinations. So Florida it is.
So we're going to highlight these five spots. Crystal River, just north of Tampa for the manatees. Nice place to hang glide, kind of central Florida, just west of Lake Okeechobee. The Everglades National Park, Key Largo, and Biscayne National Park down in the Keys.
So no matter where you are in Florida, it's likely that you're going to see seagulls. One of the interesting facts about seagulls is that when they're taking in salt water accidentally when they're trying to eat fish, they get the salt water, and most animals can't handle intaking salt water, but the seagull has a special gland above their eyes that can excrete the salt so that they're okay in doing that.
And this is very similar to the iguanas on the Galapagos Islands.
Except their glands for doing that are next to their nose instead of above their eyes.
The seagulls also have kind of evolved a method to pat their feet against the ground at a frequency very similar to rainfall hitting the ground, which causes the earthworms to come up and nice, easy food source. The horseshoe crab is found in a few different places along the Florida coast. And the horseshoe crab is unique because its blood is blue and it's used a lot for medicine. We'll talk about that here in a second. But the blue blood is caused by a lack of hemoglobin, like in most mammals, most reptiles, most animals in general. They use hemocyanin, which has copper as a metal instead of iron. And so medically what it's used for is this blue blood has kind of an odd reaction with bacterial toxins. And so what it does is the blood coagulates and clumps up. And so what they'll do in medicine is they'll spray their medical tools to make sure there's no bacteria on them and see if to see if it coagulates on the medical tools or not.
Very interesting.
So some other facts: the bottom of these horseshoe crabs, you can see all the different legs. They have 5 pair of legs. The mouth is actually in the middle of the abdomen. So think about your stomach having a mouth, basically, or your stomach area having a mouth. These things also have 9 different eyes. In addition, they also have a lot of light sensors on their tail. Now, even though they have 9 eyes, they can't see as well as humans can, but they can detect light and dark and shadows very, very well. So,
So if you'll notice, this is a fossil of a trilobite, and you can see how similar the horseshoe crab of today looks to this ancient relative of millions of years ago with the trilobite. There's several different types of trilobites. There's a few places in Indiana, in the eastern part of Indiana and the south, where you can actually go to look to try to find trilobites.
and even though the horseshoe crab has been around for 220 million years, whereas the trilobites went extinct, they haven't changed a whole lot. And they're actually not a crab at all. But early on, when people were naming animals, they thought they looked a lot more like a crab than anything else. And they're actually fairly closely related to other insect-like creatures, but not insects, like the scorpion, arachnids, that sort of organism.
So the first place that we wanted to talk about is Crystal River. It's about an hour and a half north of Tampa, or about an hour and a half north west, mostly west of Orlando. And the Crystal River is a great place for you to go and actually get to swim with manatees. The in the wintertime when manatees are needing a warmer water for survival, the springs in the Crystal River actually produce that warm water, and so you can either go out on a boat or you can get in the water with a wetsuit to see the manatees. So a manatee is oftentimes known as a sea cow, and the females are called cows, the males are called bulls, and the babies are called calves, just like cows here in Indiana are. They can weigh over 1,000 pounds. They can eat between 130 pounds and 150 pounds of vegetation per day. If they're in the freshwater rivers, they eat freshwater vegetation, and if they're in the ocean, they eat seagrasses. So when they're more active, when they're eating, which they do quite often, and when they're awake, they come up for air fairly regularly, as much as every 3 to 5 minutes. But if they're in rest, then they only come up for air about once every 20 minutes. And they need to come up for air because they are mammals. So that means that they have to breathe the oxygen.
Yep. And something that else that's kind of unique about them, obviously you can tell from the body shape, they're not that good of swimmers. They move very, very slowly. Pretty much their big tail flaps and they move a little bit forward at a time, but they're very slow. And so what they can't do because they can't swim very well is really move up and down. So most fish have a swim bladder, and when they're producing oxygen, they put extra oxygen in the swim bladder, helps them float up. Well, the manatee is somewhat similar. All it's doing is eating grass all the time, and those of you that are a little older know the more vegetation you eat, the more gassy you are. And so as it's building up methane in its intestines, it starts to float up. Well, in order to sink, again, it can't swim down very well. So in order to sink, it just farts. So just like a lot of spouses do.
So in this picture, you can see there's actually algae growing on the manatees. Because they are fairly slow moving, it allows time for algae to be able to grow on the manatee. And this is a symbiotic relationship. It's mutual, so it's called mutualism, because the algae has a place to grow, whereas the manatee gets protected from some of the harmful UV radiation from the sun. There was the big tail fin that Miles was referring to a little bit ago. A major predator, unfortunately, of the manatee is people with their boats. The manatees are coming fairly shallow for breathing the air, needing the oxygen, and the boat propeller will actually cut the manatee, sometimes killing them or definitely damaging them. So a lot of manatees are actually named and identified in certain parts of Florida because of the scarring that they have from boats.
Yeah, and unlike a lot of marine mammals and even reptiles like turtles, they can't spend that long underwater without oxygen. All right, they can't go down for 30 or 40 minutes. They can only stay down about 5 minutes at a time. So basically 24 hours a day, they're popping up every 5 minutes to get some air. So they really can't get that deep in the water. And so that's why they're always close to boats.
There you can see one coming up for air. It's a good way to spot them when you go out in the boats, and there's lots and lots of tour companies that do this. So you can just show up in the Crystal River area, find coupons, look and see which companies have deals going on to take you out in a boat. And then you either sit in the boat and watch if you don't feel comfortable swimming, or once your tour guide finds some, then they'll tell you can carefully and gently get into the water and get close to them. They don't want you touching them because it's never good to interact with wildlife, but the manatees oftentimes will come right up to you, and then you don't have any choice but if the manatee's touching you. So next, further south, as Miles mentioned earlier, west of Lake Okeechobee and east of Fort Myers, there's actually a place that you can go hang gliding. And you might think, Florida's really flat. How could you possibly go hang gliding in Florida? But Miles will explain what he did.
So it was kind of like a kite. And so this apparatus was hooked onto a plane. The plane took off in front of us, and we were just tethered on, just like if you were to run with a kite behind you to get it going. Well, most of you guys know when you run with a kite behind you, the kite's not very stable at first. It's kind of rocking back and forth. Well, this thing did that too. Once we stabilized with the plane, once it got up and started elevating a little bit less shallow, or more shallow, excuse me, we finally stabilized. But at the beginning, we were kind of flapping all over the place. Once we got to the elevation that we wanted, or the altitude that we wanted, we released from the plane, and then from that point we just kind of floated. So I was able to, he taught me how to maneuver it, how to turn one direction or the other, how to tilt up so that we would actually gain elevation without needing a plane, and then how to kind of nosedive to drop a little bit faster.
So next, you can head further south to the Everglades. So you can fly in or drive from Fort Myers south, or you could go from Miami or Fort Lauderdale coming from the east side going into the park to the west. So the Everglades, probably the thing that it's most well known for are the alligators. I would say that after visiting the Everglades, they are also known for mosquitoes. So when you go to the Everglades, take a lot of insect repellent because you're going to need it.
Especially in the middle of the night if you are camping. When you get out of the tent, be very careful to not just leave the tent flap open, because they will be in there, hundreds.
So you can see the map when you enter the Big Cypress National Preserve. You're sort of getting close to the Everglades, and you can start seeing alligators. There's 200,000 alligators within the Everglades National Park, but there's 1.5 million alligators in Florida as a whole. So you start seeing alligators anytime that you're somewhere that's, a little bit more rural setting instead of being in the city. So this is just a map that sort of shows you, if you're coming from the west, what you're going to be starting out with.
And the alligator is known as, or excuse me, came from the Spanish for el lagarto, which really just meant lizard. Well, el lagarto changed to alligato, which changed to alligator. That's what we call it today.
There's also lots of other animals and different species you can see. So there's lots of turtles, there's lots of herons and different types of birds. The previous slide, if you want to go back on your own, was talking about the first area within the there we go, Shark Valley Visitor Center. This trail, you can actually walk all the way out on the trail or bicycle, and then you can get a tram ride back. But this trail was full of alligators that you could get fairly close to, but still feel pretty safe.
But really, most people just go to see the alligators.
So you can see these are some pretty small alligators, and an interesting fact about alligators is that the temperature of the nest is going to determine if the babies are male or female. So if it's greater than 91.4 degrees, all of the babies are going to be males. If it's lesser than 82.4 degrees, they're all going to be females. And if the temperature is somewhere in between, then it's going to be approximately an even mix of male and females.
And do realize, if you ever think you can outsmart an alligator by swimming at night, they do have night vision, so don't try it. They also regrow their teeth their entire lifetime.
Although only about 10 to 20% actually survive to adulthood. So even though the adult female might be laying as many as 50 eggs, not all of those are going to survive to adulthood, because there's a lot of competition and a lot of bad things that could happen along the way. But they are very muscular, with 68% of an alligator being muscle.
Don't touch the alligators, they will bite you. They don't like eating human, but they are very defensive, so they will bite you. Don't do what I do.
This is just showing going into the Everglades National Park in the further south region. You can see that there are some trails that you can go on. We felt very safe on these trails. These trails were more just hiking trails. There weren't alligators in these particular sections the day that we were there. So this you can see was a wilderness waterway. You can rent canoes and kayaks and actually camp on these little tiny islands along the way. And it would, it's a really, really fun way to get to see a national park by boat instead of on foot. So Key Largo was the next place that we visited, but I believe that we're going to have to talk about the rest of our Florida voyage in another section. So stay tuned.
Bye for now.